infamous story of Elijah Crawford and the tragic events surrounding his family and the Crawford farm are now the stuff of legend and a dark chapter in our nation's history. Generations of Appomattox citizens have kept the story of Elijah Crawford alive by campfire tales, reenactments, and even a fully staged theatrical haunted hayride at Halloween time by a local theater company. The tragic love story of Elijah Crawford and his beloved wife Alice is the stuff of legend, a true tale harkening back to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. This story has captivated generations, and its popularity and infamy continue to grow with each passing year. In 2003, a group of people from the National Registry of Haunted Places came to the Crawford farm to perform their own investigation. In 3 days, these psychics, ghost hunters, and spiritualists were said to have contacted upwards of 21 spirits or paranormal entities on the Crawford farm, placing this in the top 30 most haunted places in our nation, and the #1 most haunted location in the state of Virginia.
Number 1.
Now our most haunted spot in Virginia, it's pretty creepy. It's the Crawford Plantation in Appomattox. Many people have heard screams coming from the woods, and strange lights have been appearing in photographs taken all over the grounds. Now I don't know if I'd do this, but you can take a tour of the grounds to investigate for yourself. I just hope you don't run into old Voodoo Elijah.
Elijah Thomas Crawford was born on September 19, 1839. Elijah was, by all accounts, a promising youth, exceeding in his studies. He reportedly spoke 4 languages by the age of 15, spending summers in London and Paris yearly. Elijah Crawford was known for his good looks, cheerful demeanor, and charming personality. In 1857, when Elijah was just 18 years old, he was granted the largest plot of land his father owned. Elijah was given 12 slaves, 10 men and 2 women, one of whom was a 19-year-old Haitian girl named Greenie, who would later become a major player in the Crawford legend. Elijah went to work clearing the land, preparing it to be farmed. After the first 6 months of work, Elijah freed all 12 of the slaves, paying them from his own earnings until the farm could turn a profit. It was during this time, somewhere around the spring of 1859, that Elijah met a 17-year-old woman from the neighboring Robertson plantation named Alice Rachel Robertson. Alice was, by all accounts, the most beautiful girl in the county and was every bit as kind as she was a beauty. She and Elijah met at a party at Walden Estate and were said to be immediately smitten. Elijah was said to have courted her for the good part of a year before asking for her hand in marriage. Alice's father, Jonathan Robertson Sr., declined to give his blessing, fearing that Elijah was a Lincoln sympathizer and a poor influence upon his daughter's political views. Then, on April 12, 1861, the American Civil War officially began, and despite being torn between his views on slavery, Elijah enlisted with the Confederate Army. It is popular opinion that Elijah's main reason for joining was to appease Jonathan Robertson Sr. and win his daughter's hand in marriage. Elijah Crawford fought valiantly for the Confederacy for just over 6 months before getting shot in the left leg on October 21, 1861, in the Battle of Ball's Bluff, Virginia. Because of this battle, Elijah was recognized as a war hero by one Thomas Jonathan Jackson, a professor at VMI. It was in this battle, alongside Elijah Crawford, that Thomas Jonathan Jackson would receive everlasting fame as Stonewall Jackson. Elijah's injuries were deemed too severe for him to continue in battle, and he was sent home to the recently completed Crawford Cottage. Within 3 days of being home, Elijah had his brother Josiah escort him to the Robertson plantation. When he arrived at the door, Robertson welcomed Elijah with open arms, and within moments had given him his blessing for the marriage of Elijah and his daughter Alice. Elijah remained standing to greet Alice and share their first kiss in celebration of their pending nuptials. Less than 3 months later, Elijah Crawford and Alice were married at Liberty Baptist Church on December 15, 1861, with 65 friends and family in attendance. Even amidst the turmoil of a war-torn country, this was the golden age on the Crawford farm. On August 23, 1863, Alice Crawford gave birth to she and Elijah's first child, a girl named Abigail Ruth Crawford. The farm continued to grow, as did Elijah's wealth. In April 1865, the war ended just 7 miles away from the Crawford farm at Appomattox Courthouse. Elijah and Alice both made the trek on the afternoon of April 9th to witness General Lee and General Grant's armies disbanding. Though most farms in the South were reeling from the loss of slave labor, Elijah, having freed his workers years earlier, was experiencing a profound amount of success. Then, in November of 1867, Elijah and Alice completed construction on a brand new home just half a mile east of Crawford Cottage, known as Crawford House. Then, in January of 1868, Alice Crawford discovered she was pregnant with a second child. Elijah was ecstatic to further his family and desperately hoped for a son. Then on September 12, 1868, during a severe tropical storm which had pushed far inland, Alice Crawford gave birth to Amos Crawford, Elijah's first and only son. Amos was born with a facial deformity and was later realized to be mentally handicapped. This night, the Crawford story went from fairy tale to tragedy. There were severe complications with the pregnancy, and Alice began losing blood at an alarming rate. Elijah called in 2 more doctors from neighboring areas who rushed through the storm to Crawford House. Despite their best efforts and the prayers of a crowd of employees, family, and friends who had gathered in the yard, just before midnight, at the age of 26, Alice Crawford passed away. Elijah, along with the help of several friends and neighbors, buried Alice on the hillside next to what was Crawford Cottage in what would become Crawford Cemetery. Just nights after his wife's burial, Elijah infamously began meeting with his former slave Greenie, who had stayed on as a servant and Elijah's right-hand worker. Greenie was from Haiti, and Greenie knew a lot about black magic and voodoo. Legend is, they would stay up all night, using Haitian voodoo to try to contact Elijah's dead wife, Alice. Then, in April of 1871, Abigail Crawford, Elijah's ivory-faced angel of a daughter, contracted typhoid fever, and just 2 weeks after being diagnosed with the disease, Abigail passed away on April 17, 1871, at the age of 9. This was the tipping point for Elijah Crawford. The night of Abigail's death, it was reported that Elijah went into the field and burnt 2 tobacco barns, reportedly attempting to walk into one of the fires, but being held back by several workers who had rushed to put out the blaze. For days, Elijah would not allow his daughter's body to leave his sight. He had a glass casket made for her, and she was buried with her 3 favorite dolls. At sunset of April 25th, and a dirge of pouring rain, Abigail's body was laid in the earth next to her mother's. Abigail's death was the tipping point for Elijah. He became a recluse. He fired all but a dozen of his workers, converted all of his old tobacco barns and grain cellars into what he called work sheds, and effectively shut down the Crawford farm. Elijah Crawford had become obsessed with the occult. He and Greenie would meet nightly in these work sheds to try to contact his dead family, and according to reports, Elijah and Greenie were experiencing some strange success. In the year following her death, neighbors and friends outside of the Crawford farm reported seeing a little girl who looked just like Abigail Crawford wandering the fields of the Crawford farm. Over the next 35 years, 19 people mysteriously lost their lives or went missing on the Crawford farm, fueling the fever and infamy surrounding Elijah Crawford and his dark dealings. There was Jonesy Letts, Elijah's pig farmer, who woke one morning at sunrise with a fever. By sundown that same day, Jonesy was dead. The fever had scarred his face so much that when they buried him, he looked like the pigs he tended. Then Elijah's son, Amos, fell victim to local woodcutters who blamed Amos for injuring one of their daughters. They found him alone in the woods, held him down against an old treehouse, and sawed off his left arm right at the shoulder. Amos miraculously survived, but he was never the same after this, being arrested 7 times on record for attacking people and trying to burn down the local dry goods store. Elijah's brother Josiah's body was found lying face forward in the old hog pond, completely entangled in barbed wire fencing. No explanation for his death was ever found. Year after year, these tragedies continued, while, according to Elijah's journal, he became closer and closer to resurrecting his family. On September 21st, 1918, after decades of these tragedies, the story hit its pinnacle when Elijah was arrested for the murder of his 23-year-old nurse, Sarah Caldwell. Elijah at this time was 79 years old and wheelchair-ridden. He found it difficult to even leave his house. Yet, his nurse, Sarah Caldwell's body was found almost 2 miles away from Crawford House, in one of Elijah's workshops, strapped to a table with both eyes sewn shut, her mouth stuffed with herbs, and the walls around her covered in pig's blood and what was later determined to be Haitian voodoo symbols. A manhunt immediately began for the 79-year-old Elijah Crawford. However, 2 weeks passed before any sign of him was ever found. Then, a neighboring boy from the Davis plantation was coming home from hunting when he looked up into a tree along the side of the road, where he saw there Elijah's body hanging by a noose 9 feet in the air. How Elijah got 9 feet in the air to hang himself is anybody's guess. The coroner who took Elijah's body to Lynchburg had access to Elijah's journal. After reading that journal, he was so convinced that Elijah had found a way to reanimate the dead that he skinned Elijah's body, removed the vital organs, the lungs, the heart, part of the spine, and threw them out the back window of his office, hopefully ensuring that Elijah would not be able to reanimate his deceased body. 2 years after his death, the Daughters of the Confederacy returned Elijah's bones to the Crawford farm, burying them in a shallow grave beneath a small walnut tree just below the hill on Crawford Cemetery. So today, we find ourselves with more questions than answers about this dark chapter in our nation's history. Did Elijah Crawford and Greenie truly find a way to bridge the worlds of the living and the dead here in the darkness of the old Crawford farm? And so tonight, we here at Wolfbane Productions wish you the safest travels as you venture through the most haunted location in the state of Virginia. And we hope you enjoy and embrace the thrills, chills, and mystery as you venture forward on the old Crawford Farm Ghost Tour.